One of the core themes of Disney's new DuckTales series is, and always has been, family. But when we think about its family structure, there's one element that's really odd and non-traditional that we don't always talk about. Parenting. Almost every parent-child relationship in this show so far has been somewhat non-traditional. Specifically, what I mean by that is most of the parental figures in DuckTales aren't a mother or father, but they're like Uncle Donald raising Huey, Dewey, and Louie, or Uncle Scrooge raising Donald and Della. And the few examples we have of mother, father, and children relationships in the show are kind of weird. And this episode gives us the perfect chance to talk about those relationships. So, let's celebrate. Happy birthday, Doofus Drake. Before we start getting into the analogies of parenting and family and how this episode brings them all together, let's set up the plot. This episode starts with Scrooge feeling there's something wrong in the mansion, and exploring to find lots of strange things. Bear attacks, and like hurricanes in a teacup, and whatever Huey and Della are doing. But in his view, none of that stuff is wrong. There's something else weird going on. And his instincts lead him straight to one of his oldest friends and greatest enemies, Goldie O'Gilt. Goldie isn't here by accident. She was actually invited to McDuck Manor by Louie. And this is a tie-in to an old episode that I kind of forgot about. In Louie's effort to try and make Louie Inc. get off the ground, he learned to work harder and work smarter from Uncle Scrooge. But for Louie, that's just too much work. So he called in Goldie O'Gilt to learn how to get rich the easy way. Unfortunately, he learned a different lesson. Don't trust Goldie.
How did this go so wrong so quickly?
Rule number one, kid. If you want to pick a pocket, you gotta get close.
Goldie's the ultimate scam artist, so it's really no surprise that she got one up on Louie. But fortunately for Louie, he does have an out. She has a use for him. She wants him to take her to Doofus Drake's birthday party. And this is where our exploration into parent and child relationships in DuckTales begins. Because as fun as it is to spend time with the complete creepy weirdo that is Doofus Drake, he's not just here to celebrate his birthday. He's here to find a good parent-child relationship. Yes, I know, that sounds completely bizarre. But as the party goes on, we find that he won't tolerate fakers. If you're not an authentic parent and child, you're gonna have to see his honey bin.
Don't you mean money bin?
No.
Goldie is there posing as Dewey's aunt, and they're there to scam party favors out of Doofus, which are millions of dollars in gems. But they're not the only ones there. This isn't just a party featuring the creepy Doofus, but sort of a short parade of some of DuckTales' best villains, including Flintheart Glumgold and Mark Beaks, both with children they didn't have before. Mark's new child is a weirdly perfect miniature version of him that's ideal for taking adorable selfies everywhere. Glumgold's offspring is a little bit more low effort. There's something perfect to me about Glumgold's fake child not only just being a hand puppet, but a hand puppet that actively hates his father.
Get off my back, Dad!
While Louie and Goldie are pulling a fake parenting scam, there's some real parental bonding going on in this episode, with Della and Huey coming together to nerd out and play a computer game together, Legends of Legends Quest. And although this at first just looks like a digital adventure they can go on and have some fun, I really like it because it's actually a good analog for parenting and teaching a kid a lesson. But most important, it's one of the first times we get to see Della be a parent and teach a kid a lesson. In the game, Della's ready to jump into action and fight some monsters and have some fun, only to discover that Huey has been playing the game in the safest way possible, toiling away on a farm in a literal protective bubble. You know, a casual gamer. At first, this looks just sort of like a difference in preference of video game playstyle. Della wants to play action games, and Huey likes farming simulators. But as the bit goes on, and Huey puts up that literal protective bubble, we learn it's more of an analogy for Huey being afraid to get outside of his comfort zone. Huey seems content with this, but Della, she sees this as an opportunity to show her son that he might be missing out on something he might like even more. As Della explains all the cool things he could do if he went to the checkpoint and leveled up, Huey says it's dangerous to go all the way to the checkpoint. He might not make it. He might lose the experience he's earned playing the game in his safe zone. But Della tries to go out and lead by example and make the point that yeah, that's safe, but if you don't go outside of your comfort zone, you'll miss out on experiencing all sorts of new things. Because that's just a fact of life. You need to try new things to level up and grow as a person. And by choosing to stay inside of that safety bubble of what Huey knows works, he's sort of robbing himself of a more interesting future. And deep down, Huey kind of knows this. It is one thing to like what you like and stick with that, but if that's all you ever do, it's all you'll ever do. And Huey watches his mom and Launchpad out in the game doing more and more interesting things, and we get to see them lead by example and get some resolve and decide that maybe he too wants something more. And he takes that risk to get outside of his comfort zone. And there's results to that. There's consequences to that. But that's the point, right? Going out and living your life involves some risk. And that's a good lesson, but it's not at all what I love about this part of the episode. So far for Della, we've seen her mostly be an adventurer on her own. Solving problems, or being silly, or going on adventures, or being full of herself and learning that maybe some things can stop Della Duck. Even though this segment is in a video game, it gives us a chance to see Della being the one thing she wanted to be all the time she was being that other stuff when she was on the moon. It's a chance we get to see her being a mother, actually teaching her kid a lesson, giving them advice, being a parent. There's something earnest and enjoyable about that, watching her start to create those motherly bonds with each of her kids. Before with Dewey and the Doomsday Vault, and now here with Huey, and teaching him that he's a great, smart kid, but if he wants to live life to the fullest, he needs to get a little bit further outside of his safe zone. I also really love the visual style of this segment. It takes place in a video game, but it backs off from being too much onto that whole pixely and distorted trope, and just does a couple of really simple style changes to make it apparent that this is in a different world. Specifically, it looks like it just eliminates the hard outline for all the characters, giving them this really cool flats look. It's just the color and the flats for the most part with some detail lines, making them look simpler, like a video game, less realistic, but without leaning in on those tropes by making everybody a pixel. And for this part of the episode and the visual style to take this approach, I just thought it looks really cool, and I really appreciated this take on how a game might look in the DuckTales world, without being cliche about it. Back at Doofus Drake's party, we find that Glumgold got eliminated pretty quickly. But Louie and Goldie are having a hard time outing Mark Beaks and his kid as imposters who are trying to scam Doofus Drake. Boyd, Mark Beaks' new son, seems like the perfect child. He's well behaved, takes great selfies, he's good at pinball, he's adorable, but there's something wrong with him. Specifically, Baby Beaks can't remember anything that happened more than 2 days ago. And when Louie presses him on the issue, something goes wrong.
Hey, when were you born again?
Yesterday! Wait, that's not right.
No. Do not peer behind the curtain of reality, bud.
Boyd's descent into realizing he's a robot is actually kind of sad. He was a nice little robot boy, but it was necessary for the plot. Now, Mark Beaks and Boyd are out of the picture, leaving Goldie and Louie the last ones standing to try and get all of the money in those gift bags. Unfortunately, they're still dealing with Doofus Drake, and he's crazy. It turns out Doofus was running a scam of his own. He was looking for a replacement for his sweet grandmother.
Mama.
And he picked Goldie.
Long reign Goldie Mama!
Goldie Mama.
And this leaves Louie in kind of an awkward position, because Goldie not only tried to scam him at the beginning of the episode, but right at the end, as they were about to get away with their little prize bags, she outed him and ran away with them on her own before getting caught. Fortunately, Louie has a bigger heart than Goldie and comes back to rescue her. Unfortunately for Louie, Goldie's heart is still a little bit darker than his. But how this story ends up isn't really the point of what made it interesting to me. At the beginning of this video, I started talking about parental-child relationships and how in DuckTales, a lot of them are non-standard. And the relationship that Louie develops with Goldie is kind of indicative of that. DuckTales sort of leans pretty hard into this idea of a found family. Who your parents are biologically isn't necessarily who your family is, or who even your parents are. He starts out joking that Goldie is his aunt, but by the end of the ordeal they've been through together, he thinks about her that way, to the point that he's trying to teach Doofus a lesson at the end that you'll find that the more time you spend around people, the more like family they become. And I think that idea of having a family that isn't necessarily your traditional family relationship in this show is really interesting. Because the kinds of traditional families we've seen in this show are by far the most dysfunctional. After inheriting millions of dollars from his grandmother, Doofus became distant, and his relationship with his parents became one of a parent and child relationship to one where he employs his mother and father as a butler and maid. And the only other traditional parent, mother, father, and child relationship in the show that I can think of right now is Scrooge McDuck and his parents, who he's basically been estranged to for decades or longer. DuckTales is definitely a show about family, but that doesn't mean it's a show about traditional family. And that theme could be really important to the reestablishment of a traditional family relationship in this show. If most of the kids' relationships are found family or non-traditional uncles raising them, then it gives hope for Della, who should have been their regular traditional mother raising them from birth, but couldn't because she got trapped in space. But now, since they're getting used to forming family relationships through spending time and growing closer with people who are essentially strangers in some regard, Uncle Scrooge and Mrs. Beakley and such, then Della has hope to re-establish that relationship as one of their parents, as one of their mother, as a part of the family, despite basically not being there for their entire lives. And even though it's played mostly through gags and jokes, I think this episode does a pretty good job of showing that family can be who you're with, and not necessarily who you're born into, and how that gives an opportunity to the people you were born with to re-establish family ties even after a long estrangement. Beyond all that kind of analysis though, I think this is a really good episode. And I think it's a better episode than the last one we saw, which is Whatever Happened to Donald Duck. Because while that was really important to the plot, this one just felt like it had a little bit more cohesion, a little bit more humor, and a little bit more spirit. And I think this is the kind of episode that's really good when DuckTales hits its stride. I also like that its ending does some legwork to redeem Doofus Drake, to maybe plant the seeds to make him more of the lovable, happy character he was in the original series than the complete and total weirdo he is in this one. This episode's also a little bit of a surprise because I initially expected to find out more about what happened to Donald when he came back to Earth. And this episode kind of sets the tone to let us know we're maybe not going to find that out right away, and we may not get to see most of his adventures that he goes on his own. Either way though, I am looking forward to seeing those adventures when we get them, and I was completely satisfied with this story. That's it for this one. Please stay tuned as I try and keep up with the new episodes of DuckTales as they come out, again, in fairly rapid fire, before I think what might be the end of the season in the next 2 weeks, but hopefully they'll have another short delay before giving us another batch late in November, because this is a lot of fun. I don't want these episodes to end quite yet. Either way, as always, thank you for watching, and like I say every time, take it easy, Internet. Have a good one.